individual pictures, handmade with love and passion and care by individual picture makers.
Hollywood's golden age, a time of glamour when stars were larger than life and we waited in long lines just to see them on the silver screen. But here's something the fan magazines never told you. Not every star appreciated the people who made them famous. Some made it very clear they wanted nothing to do with the ordinary folks who bought the tickets. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 10 golden age stars who treated their fans like dirt. Number 10. Katharine Hepburn. Let's start with one of Hollywood's most celebrated actresses, someone who won 4 Academy Awards and became an icon of independence and sophistication. But Katharine Hepburn had a relationship with her fans that could best be described as frosty, if not downright hostile. Hepburn refused to sign autographs, period. She wouldn't pose for photographs with fans, she rarely gave interviews, and she made no secret of the fact that she found the whole business of celebrity worship tiresome. There's a story that became quite famous in Hollywood. Once, when a crowd of fans chased her down the street asking for her autograph, she turned around and snapped at them. Her exact words, according to those who were there, were, "Beat it, go sit on a tack." When the fans protested, saying, "We made you," Hepburn shot back, "Like hell you did." Now, you might think that's just Katharine being Katharine, showing that famous independent streak. But here's the thing. Other actresses of her era, like Joan Crawford and June Allison, made it a point to answer every single fan letter personally. They understood something that Hepburn either didn't understand or didn't care about. Those fans weren't just admirers, they were the reason any of them had careers at all. Her colleagues noticed this attitude too. Ginger Rogers, who worked with Hepburn on Stage Door in 1937, described her as snippy and said she was never on her side. And it wasn't just Ginger who felt this way. When Hepburn worked with Robert Mitchum on Undercurrent in 1946, she apparently told the young actor, "You know you can't act, and if you hadn't been good looking, you would never have got a picture at all." Can you imagine saying something so cruel to a colleague? That was Katharine Hepburn. When Hepburn showed up on movie sets, she refused to dress like other actresses. When RKO's costume department tried to take away her preferred trousers one day, she simply walked around the studio in her underwear until they gave them back. That's certainly bold, but it also shows a woman who simply didn't care what anyone else thought. She wore men's clothing at a time when women were expected to wear skirts and dresses. She showed up without makeup when other actresses spent hours in the makeup chair. In her mind, she was being authentic. To everyone else, it looked like arrogance. By 1938, theater owners had had enough. They declared Hepburn box office poison, listing her among actresses they didn't want in their theaters because audiences had turned against her. Part of that was the film she was making, sure. But part of it was also that the public had figured out she didn't particularly like them. And in an era when stars were supposed to maintain the illusion of accessibility, Hepburn's coldness stood out. The press took to calling her Katharine of Arrogance, and it stuck. She was fiercely protective of her privacy, which is one thing, but there's a difference between wanting privacy and treating the people who admire your work with contempt. Hepburn seemed to believe she owed her success entirely to herself, and everyone else could take a hike. Her family even noticed how difficult she could be. Her niece, Katherine Houghton, once commented that her aunt could be maddeningly self-righteous and bossy. Hepburn herself admitted to being a me person, especially in her younger years. And while she had the self-awareness to recognize this trait, she didn't seem particularly interested in changing it. Years later, Hepburn defended her choices by saying she had no interest in playing the Hollywood game. She said she couldn't be bothered with the social circuit, the press junkets, the fan interactions. Fair enough. But then, why choose a career that depended entirely on public approval? It's like becoming a baker and then complaining that you have to deal with people who want bread. Number 9. Bette Davis. Bette Davis was a powerhouse. 2-time Oscar winner, 10 Academy Award nominations, and a career that spanned 6 decades. She could play complex, difficult women better than anyone else in Hollywood. But here's the uncomfortable truth. A lot of that difficult personality wasn't just acting. Davis herself admitted it later in life. She once said, and I'm quoting her directly here, "I was a legendary terror. I was insufferably rude and ill-mannered in the cultivation of my career. I had no time for pleasantries." Think about that for a moment. She actually used the words insufferably rude to describe herself. And she said she had no time for pleasantries, which included, you guessed it, her fans. On movie sets, Davis was known for being demanding, difficult, and often downright mean to people around her. She yelled at directors, fought with studio executives, and made life miserable for many of her co-workers. Celeste Holm, who worked with her on All About Eve, later said that Davis hated when she simply said good morning to her. Imagine being so disagreeable that you can't even tolerate a friendly greeting. What made Davis particularly frustrating was that she knew she was difficult and actually seemed proud of it. She wore it like a badge of honor. In her mind, being uncompromising and volcanic was part of what made her a great actress. And maybe it did, but it also made her someone that a lot of people, including fans, learned to avoid. Davis had a sharp tongue, and she used it freely. She feuded with just about everyone, from studio heads to fellow actresses. Her rivalry with Joan Crawford became legendary, and not in a good way. The things these two women said about each other were absolutely venomous. Davis once said she wouldn't cross the street to help Crawford if she saw her in trouble. That's the kind of person we're talking about here. For fans who approached her, Davis could be withering. She didn't suffer what she considered foolishness, and in her mind, most people were fools. She described herself as uncompromising, peppery, intractable, monomaniacal, tactless, volatile, and oftentimes disagreeable. Her exact words. And yet somehow, we're all supposed to remember her fondly. Number 8. Frank Sinatra. Old Blue Eyes, the voice, the chairman of the board. Frank Sinatra was one of the 20th century's greatest entertainers, no question about it. But he was also someone with a hair-trigger temper who thought the rules didn't apply to him. And if you were a fan who caught him on a bad day, you were in for a rough time. Sinatra's mood swings were legendary in Hollywood. People who worked with him said you never knew which Frank was going to show up. He could be generous and charming one minute, then turn around and tear someone's head off the next. Arrangers and musicians approached him with genuine fear because they never knew when he might explode. Nelson Riddle and Anthony Fanzo, who arranged music for Sinatra, said that collaborators approached him with uneasiness because of his unpredictable and often volatile temperament. There's a famous incident that shows you exactly what kind of man Sinatra could be. In the 1960s, he was at the Beverly Hills Club and spotted a writer named Harlan Ellison. Sinatra didn't like Ellison's boots. That's right, his boots. So Frank walked over and started insulting this man he'd never met before, making fun of his footwear. When Ellison asked why Sinatra was even talking to him, Frank said, "I don't like the way you're dressed." Ellison, who had more spine than most, told Sinatra he dressed to please himself. The tension got so thick that Ellison finally just left. And what did Sinatra do? He told the club management he didn't want anyone in there without coats and ties, a grown man throwing a tantrum over someone else's boots. But that was nothing compared to how he could treat fans. If you caught Sinatra when he didn't feel like being bothered, which was most of the time, you were out of luck. He was known for being downright rude to people who asked for autographs or wanted to take photos. The comedian Rob Hubel once approached Sinatra as a fan and got slapped across the face for his trouble. Sinatra thought it was funny. It wasn't. Sinatra's violent streak extended beyond just being rude. When he was married to Mia Farrow, he divorced her by having his lawyer serve her papers right on the set of Rosemary's Baby. Why? Because he was angry she'd taken the role without his permission. He'd told her, "You're giving birth to the devil? I don't like it. My mother will flip if she sees you doing this." When Farrow insisted on doing the film anyway, Sinatra ended the marriage in the most humiliating way possible, and there are stories of Sinatra getting into actual physical altercations. At the Sands Casino in Las Vegas, after manager Carl Cohen refused to grant Sinatra $50,000 in free chips, Frank jumped on a blackjack table in rage. When Cohen tried to calm him down at a coffee shop, Sinatra threw scalding hot coffee on Cohen's lap. Cohen responded by punching Sinatra in the face, knocking the caps off his front teeth. Being the kind of man he was, Sinatra then went back to Los Angeles and told his mob associates he wanted Cohen murdered. Thankfully, they didn't take the order seriously, because Sinatra was an entertainer, not a gangster. But the fact that he thought he could make that call tells you everything you need to know about how he viewed himself versus everyone else. The man had connections to organized crime, and he wasn't shy about using them to intimidate people. In 1947, newspaper reporters connected him with deported mafia boss Charles Lucky Luciano. know. Sinatra was found at New York Airport Customs with a briefcase containing $3 million in cash. Federal agents had to let him go when fans started flooding in, almost causing a riot. That's how brazen he was. His treatment of people on film sets was no better. When he filmed Guys and Dolls with Marlon Brando in 1955, he was angry that he hadn't been offered a more serious role. When composer Frank Loesser tried to correct him on how to sing one of the songs, Sinatra responded with, "We'll do it my way, or you can go to hell." He feuded with Brando throughout the entire shoot. Sinatra once described himself as a first-class manic depressive, and maybe that explains some of his behavior, but plenty of people struggle with mental health issues without treating everyone around them like garbage. The truth is, Sinatra felt entitled to behave however he wanted, and he surrounded himself with people who would enable that behavior rather than challenge it. Number 7. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford is a complicated case. On one hand, she was famous for answering every single fan letter personally, typing them up on blue paper and signing each one. She remembered the names of crew members on her film sets. She seemed to understand, at least intellectually, that fans were important. She once said, "It's important to remember people. I pride myself on doing that." But there was another side to Joan Crawford, a side that could be mean, manipulative, and sometimes cruel. Her own daughter, Christina, wrote a tell-all book called Mommy Dearest that painted a picture of a woman who was tyrannical and abusive at home. The book detailed incidents of rage, control, and bizarre behavior. And while some people questioned the book's accuracy, there were enough other stories floating around Hollywood to suggest that Christina wasn't entirely making things up. Crawford had a reputation in Hollywood for being difficult to work with. When she filmed Johnny Guitar with Mercedes McCambridge in 1954, the two actresses fought constantly. Why? Well, it probably didn't help that Crawford had slept with McCambridge's husband. At one point during filming, a drunk Crawford threw McCambridge's clothes onto the highway and let cars run over them. McCambridge later called Crawford a mean, tipsy, powerful, rotten egg lady. Crawford shot back with, "I have 4 children. I do not need a 5th." Director Michael Curtis, who worked with Crawford on Mildred Pierce, initially didn't want her anywhere near his film. He complained about her hi-hat airs and her shoulder pads, calling her a has-been. "She comes over here with her hi-hat airs and her goddamn shoulder pads," he told studio heads. "Why should I waste my time directing a has-been?" And you know what? He wasn't the only director who felt that way. Crawford could be demanding, manipulative, and exhausting to work with. What makes Crawford's case interesting is the contradiction. She played the Hollywood game better than almost anyone. She knew how to work the publicity machine. She understood that fans mattered. But when you scratched beneath that carefully polished surface, there was often someone cold and calculating underneath. She collected fans like she collected everything else in her life, methodically and with an eye toward what they could do for her. Her legendary feud with Bette Davis became one of Hollywood's most famous rivalries. The two women despised each other for decades. When they finally worked together on Whatever Happened to Baby Jane in 1962, their animosity created a toxic atmosphere on set. Davis allegedly hit Crawford hard enough during one scene to split her head open. Crawford retaliated by loading herself down with rocks and weights before a scene where Davis had to drag her body across the floor, knowing that Davis had back problems. During the Oscar campaign for Baby Jane, Crawford went out of her way to sabotage Davis's chances. She contacted the other Best Actress nominees and offered to accept the award on their behalf if they couldn't attend. When Anne Bancroft won, Crawford swept onto the stage and accepted the Oscar right in front of Davis, who had been nominated. It was a calculated act of cruelty designed to humiliate her co-star. The way she treated the people closest to her suggests that all that fan appreciation might have been just another performance, another role she played, because if she could be that cruel to her own children, as Christina's book suggests, and if she could be that vindictive to her colleagues, then how much of her kindness to strangers was real? Maybe she understood on an intellectual level that she needed fans, but that doesn't mean she actually cared about them as people. Number 6. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando changed acting forever. His method approach and naturalistic style influenced generations of performers. A Streetcar Named Desire, On the Waterfront, The Godfather. These are genuine masterpieces. The man revolutionized what it meant to be a film actor. But Brando also had a reputation for being difficult, unpredictable, and sometimes downright impossible. And as his career progressed, he seemed to develop nothing but contempt for the business that made him famous and the fans who supported him. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, Brando's behavior on sets had become notorious. He showed up late. He refused to learn his lines, and he made life miserable for directors and fellow actors. When he worked with Frank Sinatra on Guys and Dolls, the two men couldn't stand each other. Sinatra liked to work quickly, getting scenes done in 1 or 2 takes. Brando, using his method approach, wanted to do take after take. And here's the thing, Brando would deliberately mess up scenes just to irritate Sinatra, forcing more retakes. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he enjoyed watching Sinatra's frustration. During the production of Mutiny on the Bounty in 1962, Brando's behavior became even more problematic. He fought with the director, he demanded constant rewrites, and the production went wildly over budget. The film, which was supposed to cost $6 million, ended up costing $20 million. It nearly bankrupted MGM. And Brando, he didn't seem to care. He collected his massive paycheck and moved on to the next project. But the problems went beyond professional disagreements. Brando became increasingly reclusive and strange as he got older. He gained massive amounts of weight and stopped caring about his appearance or his performances. He bought his own private island in Tahiti and spent months at a time there, away from Hollywood, away from the public, away from everything. When he did come back to make films, it was clear he was only there for the money. By the time he showed up for Apocalypse Now in 1979, director Francis Ford Coppola was horrified. Brando showed up overweight and unprepared, having never read Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, the novel the film was based on. He demanded rewrites on the spot and improvised most of his scenes. Coppola later said that working with Brando was one of the most difficult experiences of his career, and this was a man who had already dealt with all the other problems that plagued that production. For Superman in 1978, Brando demanded millions of dollars for what amounted to a glorified cameo. He showed up, read his lines off cue cards that were placed around the set, and collected his check. He put in minimal effort and made no attempt to hide his disdain for the project. He had suggested playing the character as a bagel, which gives you some idea of how seriously he was taking the whole thing. For fans, Brando was a disappointment. He made it clear he had contempt for the movie business and for the people who watched his films. He gave bizarre interviews where he seemed to mock the very idea of celebrity. He talked about how acting wasn't really a serious profession, how anyone could do it. He seemed to take pleasure in tearing down the mystique of Hollywood and the craft that had made him famous. In his later years, he became a recluse, living on his private island in Tahiti and avoiding the public entirely. When he did make public appearances, they were often strange and uncomfortable. There's a selfishness to Brando's behavior that's hard to overlook. He had extraordinary talent, but he squandered it. He took enormous paychecks for films while putting in minimal effort. The fans who made him wealthy and famous, they seemed to mean nothing to him. He viewed them as part of a system he had come to despise, and he made no effort to hide that contempt. Number 5. Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich was exotic, mysterious, and utterly captivating on screen. She was one of the first German actresses to become a major Hollywood star, and she crafted an image of glamour and sophistication that made her an icon. She worked with director Joseph von Sternberg on films like Morocco, Shanghai Express, and The Scarlet Empress that defined her mystique. But that carefully constructed image came at a price, and sometimes fans paid that price. Dietrich was obsessive about controlling her image. She dictated how she would be photographed, what angles were acceptable, how the lighting should be set up. She learned from von Sternberg to use full-length mirrors to check the lighting before scenes were filmed. She spent hours preparing for even the simplest appearance. Every curl had to be perfect, every shadow had to fall just right, and heaven help anyone who tried to photograph her without permission or catch her off guard. During her career, Dietrich maintained an air of mystery that kept people at a distance. She never fully let anyone in. Even her most intimate relationships seemed calculated, part of the image she was building. She had affairs with both men and women, including Gary Cooper, John Wayne, and Frank Sinatra, all while remaining married to her husband, Rudolph Sieber. She passed intimate letters from her lovers to her husband, sometimes with biting comments. Everything was a performance, even her private life. As she aged, Dietrich became increasingly reclusive. By the 1970s, she had essentially become a hermit, hiding away in her Paris apartment. She refused to be seen or photographed. During a performance in Australia in 1975, she fell off the stage and broke her leg, and that became her excuse to retire completely. When filmmaker Maximilian Schell made a documentary about her in 1984, she agreed to be interviewed but absolutely refused to be on camera. For someone whose entire career had been built on her image, her refusal to let anyone see her in her later years felt like a betrayal to the fans who had loved her. "I dress for the image," she once said. "Not for myself, not for the public, not for fashion, not for men." That statement tells you everything you need to know about Marlene Dietrich. The image was all that mattered. The public wasn't part of the equation. They were just consumers of a product she had carefully manufactured. But even in her prime, Dietrich could be difficult. She was known for being demanding and particular. Everything had to be just so. She treated her image like a business transaction, and fans were simply consumers of that product. There was a coldness to her, a distance that she maintained even with the people who adored her work. For the last 12 years of her life, she was an invalid, avoiding being seen in public at all costs. She died on May 6, 1992, at the age of 90, still hiding in that Paris apartment. She had spent decades entertaining millions of people, but in the end, she wanted nothing to do with any of them. She shut herself away from the world and died alone, which was apparently exactly what she wanted. Number 4. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift was beautiful, talented, and troubled. He brought a sensitivity to the screen that was revolutionary for male actors in the 1940s and 50s. Films like A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity showed what he was capable of. But Clift's demons eventually consumed him, and along the way, he became someone who was difficult for fans to connect with. After a catastrophic car accident in 1956 that severely damaged his face, Clift became increasingly isolated. The accident happened during the filming of Raintree County, and while he returned to complete the picture, he was never the same. His face had been reconstructed through surgery, but the damage was profound. He became dependent on painkillers and alcohol, and his behavior became erratic. For fans who had fallen in love with his earlier work, seeing him after the accident was heartbreaking, and Clift knew it. He became bitter and withdrawn. He didn't want people's pity, but he also couldn't handle their shock at his changed appearance. So he retreated. He stopped engaging with the public. He gave fewer interviews. He made it clear that he wanted to be left alone. The tragedy of Montgomery Clift is that his pain was real and understandable, but the effect was the same. He cut himself off from the people who cared about him and his work. He died alone in 1966 at the age of 45, a shell of the brilliant actor he'd once been. Number 3. Greta Garbo. "I want to be alone." It's one of the most famous lines in movie history, spoken by Garbo in Grand Hotel in 1932, and it became her calling card. But here's the thing, she really meant it. Garbo didn't just play reclusive characters, she lived that way. Garbo was born Greta Lovisa Gustafsson in Stockholm, Sweden in 1905. She came to Hollywood in the mid-1920s and became one of the biggest stars of both the silent era and the talkies. Films like Anna Karenina, Camille, and Ninochka showcased her extraordinary talent. She had a face that the camera loved and a mysterious quality that captivated audiences worldwide. MGM promoted her as the Swedish Sphinx, and she lived up to that image. But after retiring from films in 1941 at the age of 36, Garbo essentially disappeared from public life. She spent the next 50 years avoiding cameras, refusing interviews, and rebuffing fans. If someone recognized her on the street, she would turn away or hide her face. She lived in New York City, of all places, but managed to remain almost completely invisible. She'd walk the streets wearing large sunglasses and scarves, trying to blend in, and if anyone approached her, she'd simply walk away without a word. For fans who loved her work in films like Grand Hotel and Ninochka, this was devastating. She had been one of the biggest stars in the world, and then she simply walked away. No explanations, no farewell, just silence. There was no final interview, no retrospective, no acknowledgement of the millions of people who had loved her work. She just disappeared. There's something almost cruel about Garbo's withdrawal. She had created these beautiful performances that touched millions of people, and then she acted like those same people had no right to any connection with her. She wanted their admiration and their money when she was working, but she wanted nothing to do with them once she stopped. She lived another 49 years after her last film, and in all that time, she never once publicly acknowledged her fans or her legacy. Some people romanticize Garbo's reclusiveness, seeing it as a kind of artistic integrity. They talk about how she was protecting her mystique, maintaining the illusion, but you could also see it as a profound rejection of the people who made her famous. She took everything Hollywood and her fans had to offer, and then she disappeared without a word of thanks. What makes Garbo's case particularly interesting is that she wasn't just avoiding the press or the Hollywood social scene, she was avoiding everyone. She had a few close friends, but even they had to respect her desire for privacy. She never married, though she had several romantic relationships. She never had children. She lived a life of almost complete isolation, and that was apparently exactly what she wanted. She died in 1990 at the age of 84, still a mystery. Even after her death, she maintained her privacy. Her funeral was small and private, attended only by a handful of people. To the very end, she kept the world at arm's length. And while we can respect her desire for privacy, we can also acknowledge that she owed at least some gratitude to the people who made her a legend. A simple thank you wouldn't have killed her. Number 2. Barbara Stanwyck. This one might surprise you. Barbara Stanwyck had a reputation as a professional, someone who showed up on time, knew her lines, and did her job. But she also had a reputation for being tough, demanding, and not particularly warm. Stanwyck came from nothing. She was orphaned young and had to fight for everything she ever got. That background made her strong, but it also made her hard. She didn't suffer fools, and she didn't have much patience for sentimentality, including the kind of sentiment that fans often expressed. On movie sets, Stanwyck was all business. She didn't socialize much with her co-stars. She didn't engage in the Hollywood social scene. She came to work, did her job brilliantly, and then went home. For fans hoping to catch a glimpse of her or get an autograph, she could be brusque and dismissive. The thing about Stanwyck was that she seemed to view acting as a job, not as some kind of mystical art form, and fans were just part of the business, not people she felt any particular connection to. She was polite enough when she had to be, but there was always a wall there. You could admire her work, but you couldn't get close to her. Number 1. Charles Laughton. Charles Laughton was one of the greatest character actors of Hollywood's golden age. His performances in The Private Life of Henry VIII, Mutiny on the Bounty, and Witness for the Prosecution are extraordinary. But Laughton was also someone who struggled with his own self-image, and often took that struggle out on the people around him. Laughton was deeply insecure about his appearance. He knew he wasn't conventionally handsome, and it bothered him. This insecurity made him defensive and sometimes cruel. On film sets, he could be difficult and demanding, pushing directors and fellow actors to their limits. For fans, Laughton presented a strange contradiction. He was brilliant in his performances, able to transform himself completely into whatever role he was playing. But in person, he could be cold and distant. He didn't enjoy the celebrity aspect of his career. He didn't like being recognized or asked for autographs. He wanted to be left alone to do his work. The sad thing about Laughton is that his talent deserved more celebration than it got. But his own attitude, his own discomfort with fame and public attention got in the way. He never fully embraced the fans who appreciated what he could do, and that was their loss as much as it was his. So there you have it, 10 stars from Hollywood's golden age who had complicated, often hostile, relationships with the fans who made them famous. Now it's important to remember that these were real people with real struggles. The studio system was brutal. The pressure to maintain an image was enormous. Privacy was almost impossible. Many of these stars had legitimate reasons for being difficult. But here's the thing, other stars managed to handle those same pressures with grace and kindness. Stars like James Stewart, Cary Grant, and Audrey Hepburn showed that you could be professional, protect your privacy, and still treat people with basic respect and courtesy. The stars on this list made a choice. They chose to see their fans as an inconvenience rather than as the people who bought the tickets that paid their salaries. They chose coldness over warmth, distance over connection. And while we can still appreciate their work, their incredible talent, and their contributions to cinema, we don't have to pretend they were nice people. Hollywood's golden age gave us some of the greatest films ever made, but it also gave us a lesson about the difference between talent and character. You can have all the talent in the world, but if you treat people poorly, that's what they'll remember. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories from Hollywood's golden age. And remember, the next time you watch one of these classic films, you'll know a little bit more about the real people behind those perfect images on the screen.